They have a combined 12 years in the National Football League. They combined for 65 career sacks, 232 tackles, 1 Pro Bowl selection, and 1 Employee of the Month award.
That's just a straight shooter with upper management written all over him.
It's Train and Grose on the All AZ Podcast Network.
Welcome in is episode 102. Train and Grose, B-Train, Bertrand Berry, Mike Grose, and Sean Crespin. Back at you again after a little bit of a layoff. But B-Train, it's great to see you, my friend.
It's good to see you, brother, as always. And, I miss you, man. Anytime we don't get to talk, it's always a void in my life. So I'm glad we are reunited, and it feels so good.
And Sean Crespin along for the ride as well. Sean Crespin, he's actually on camera. He's just so thin now you can't see him. Him and his strawberries. The amazing disappearing Sean Crespin.
Yeah.
Sounds like there's a promo built in there somewhere. You better get on that, Sean Crespin. Hey, a lot has transpired since last we conversed, fellas, and I figured we start in the NBA, and let's start with the game on the court. And maybe not surprising in the Western Conference, you got your number 1 seed, Denver Nuggets, and of course, everybody had the number 8 seed Miami Heat advancing to the NBA Finals. But you got Nikola Jokic versus Jimmy Butler. Your series starts coming up, and I always should do this. We're recording on the 31st of May, so the series starts tomorrow.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it, Mike. I know for a lot of fringe basketball fans, this probably isn't the sexiest matchup you can come up with as far as names that you can easily recognize. But I think for the two teams that are going to be on the court, this is fascinating. It's going to be a game of styles. We always say styles might make fights. And I think for these two teams, I'll be interested to see if the grit of Miami can really overcome the size and the depth of the Denver Nuggets. And Mike, as a guy that we both have lived in Denver for a little bit of time, and we both know that altitude is for real. There have been teams that have gone up there and they haven't fared very well. I wonder with the short roster of the Miami Heat, will they be able to withstand that constant pressure that the Denver Nuggets are going to put at them as they run 10 guys out there every single game?
Yeah, and the Nuggets got, or have been getting, is probably a better way to put it, what the Suns didn't get, and that's regular contributions from that 10 deep that you mentioned, B-Train, and that's going to be so critically important. And the other thing, too, just taking a step back and even at a higher level, as you said, we both lived in Denver, and clearly Denver is a Broncos town. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And you might even argue that, ahead of the Nuggets, even though they've been there the longest, the Colorado Avalanche, because of all the success they've had on the ice. But I'm stoked because, as you guys know, I talk about this all the time. I spent time around the Denver Nuggets in the Wayback Machine back in the 80s, and I had an occasion to catch up with Fat Lever recently at an event. And we sat and talked for hours about, the atmosphere around that team and how exciting the brand of basketball was back in the day. To your point about the B-Train, where they were running up and down the court, wearing people out, it just never translated into championships. So just for this town and for this team that's been there to be in this position, I think is quite remarkable. Not all that dissimilar to what we saw a couple of years ago when the Suns went all the way to the finals against the Bucks, right? There's a longtime NBA team, a team that came over from the ABA way back in the day, but really, not having that championship yet, which I think will be, won't be Denver's first. Certainly, we know that story. But for this franchise, I think it'll be very, very cool if they're able to pull it off. And, if you're a betting man, you got to look at this. You got a 1 versus 8. You got the advantage of the altitude. You got a deeper bench. You got, arguably, one of the preeminent players of this era, Nikola Jokic. So I look at it and I'm saying, this all signs point to the Denver Nuggets. But then you're like, who have the Heat beat? They went in and they've knocked off some pretty good teams. And Jimmy Butler, my goodness, discount Jimmy Butler at your own peril.
Yeah, Jimmy has been unbelievable. And you look at the teams that they've knocked off, Mike, they've knocked off the top two seeds in the Eastern Conference. You look at the Milwaukee Bucks, who they took care of in the first round, and then you look at what they were able to do to the Boston Celtics, a team that everybody thought that they would have a cakewalk to a return trip to the NBA Finals, and it has not worked out that way. So you cannot count this team out. They've overcome a lot of odds. But then I look at the Denver Nuggets, Mike. Now you've seen all four major sports teams in Denver get to the championship. I mean, has Denver now officially become that sports town that they've always thought that they were? I mean, because, you can say all four major sports that are in Denver have at least played for a championship. Not all have won. We know the Rockies played for a championship. But, the fact that now Denver is now playing for a championship, the Nuggets, now all four teams can say they've gotten to the last game or the last series in the sport. And so you may have to start putting a little more respect on Denver's name as far as a sports town than what you had in years past.
You and I, spent time there. I know Sean's been in and out of Denver, and I think it's a great sports town. I think it's amazing, but to get that recognition nationally now, as you said, all four in that conversation, especially if you do it. But I want to go back to a point about the Heat, and you mentioned, you knock off the Bucks, you knock off the Knicks, and then you go and you knock off the Celtics the way they did, clinching game. You clinch the Bucks series in Milwaukee. You clinch the Celtics Game 7 in Boston. But I think even more impressive, like you put your back up against the wall if you're the Heat, because if you recall all the way back to the play-in, they lost that first game to Trae Young and the Hawks. They lost that first game, double-digit loss if memory serves, and then had to come back and beat the Bulls. So you look at a team that's used to playing with their back against the wall, right? And I think it's sport. You look at that, it's not always the best team, but it's a team that's the hottest. It's a team that had to win down the stretch to get into the postseason. And I think this Heat team really fits that bill. And then the other thing is, and going back a couple of years, I said some stuff about Michael Malone and the head coach of the Nuggets. The flip side of that, though, is Eric Spoelstra. Like, is this guy maybe the most underrated coach in the NBA? Never won Coach of the Year, ever. And a lot of people still look at him as, he's Pat Riley's assistant. Which I heard somebody talking about it today. They're like, hey, look what Pat Riley did this year. Pat Riley's back in the championship. Like, all right, I get it. But what about Eric Spoelstra and the job that he continues to do in Miami?
Mike, it's unbelievable how much he goes under the radar and he doesn't get that national respect that he really deserves. Mike, think about how many finals he's played in, or coached in, I should say, and the teams that he's taken to the finals. Yes, you had the four with LeBron and D Wade and Chris Bosh, but then you look at the bubble team that lost to the Lakers. That was Eric Spoelstra. Now you look at this team, an 8 seed, the second 8 seed to get all the way to the finals. Mike, you have to put some respect on Eric Spoelstra's name. The man can coach and he knows his basketball. Yes, you can give Pat Riley a little bit of credit for creating the culture and the overall atmosphere of the Miami Heat. But make no mistake about it, this is Eric Spoelstra's team. He is the guy in charge. Yes, he has bosses. When you're the coach, you have a general manager, team president, and an owner that you have to answer to. But I think it's finally time now to start looking at Eric Spoelstra as one of the great coaches of all time.
Yeah, Eric Spoelstra's been at the helm of the Heat since 2008. Since 2008, won almost 1,200 regular season games. And you look at the success in the postseason. And look, I get it. That roster back then that was loaded. I understand that. But if it was easy, everybody that coached LeBron James would win championships, right? You can make the case when you've got LeBron, the job might even be harder. So. Yeah, I think it's just remarkable, and I'm really looking forward to this. And like I said, all signs pointing towards the Denver Nuggets, but discount this Miami Heat team at your own peril. I think it's going to be an exciting series. I'm looking forward to it. What about? I know we don't do predictions, but what's your gut tell you, B-Train? What are you thinking in terms of how this thing plays itself out?
As great of a story as this is for the Miami Heat, and as much as I just went on and on about Eric Spoelstra, I got the Nuggets in 5. I think it's just too much Denver. I think it's too much Joker. Their depth is too much, and they're not going to. The Denver Nuggets are not going to fold like the Boston Celtics did in the last series. They just have a much different mental makeup than the Boston Celtics. And we've lamented about that team for many, many years now with the young stars that they still have. But make no mistake about it, this Denver Nuggets team is not the Boston Celtics. They are a loaded team, and they are looking to take you out.
Yeah. I don't know if it's that quick, but I agree with you. I think the Nuggets will take care of this thing. I like it in 6, but, hey, that's why they play it. And we'll see how it plays out. Meanwhile, here locally, B-Train, we told you we were going to go down this path. The Phoenix Suns. Since we last met, I believe we talked right after the Suns were eliminated, and we knew this was going to be an interesting offseason for the Phoenix Suns with questions about Chris Paul. What do you do with him? You're under 30 days now where you've got to make a decision whether or not you keep him around, whether or not you want to pay him what you are going to have to pay him, or can you rework the deal, whatever. So you got questions about Chris Paul. DeAndre Ayton cannot be a Phoenix Sun. I'm sorry. The way his season ended, and it's not all his fault. I understand that. But DeAndre Ayton cannot be a Phoenix Sun going forward. But then the biggest thing that, look, in the back of your mind, you had to know that it was a possibility. You've got a new owner. You've got, a situation where, you have a team here in the Suns that were not eliminated. Yeah, they were eliminated, but they were embarrassed 2 years in a row on elimination games. Last year to the Nuggets, last year to the Mavericks, this year to the Nuggets. And look, whether it's not all on the head coach, I understand that, but you can't fire a roster full of players. But in the NBA, as much as any sport, the head coach is the fall guy. Monty Williams was let go by the new owner right after the end of this season. And I know, we've talked about it on this podcast. You've got, personal feelings about Monty Williams, but I know this one hits you hard based on the text exchange that we shared when this news came down.
Mike, it just pissed me off because you look at this team and how they folded down the stretch again in the playoffs. I understand that you cannot fire the players. They make too much money. But I look at a guy like Monty Williams and what he was able to do in his short period of coaching with the Phoenix Suns. He got them to a finals. He got them to a best record in the NBA another season. What more does the man have to do? I understand that it's a bottom line business and it's really what matters in May, what you do in order to keep your job. But this felt completely unjustified, especially when you blew the roster up midway through the season at the trade deadline to bring in a Kevin Durant. They basically had 7 days plus the playoffs in order to try to make, or 7 games plus the playoffs to make this thing happen because of the injury of Kevin Durant when he was at the shoot around at Phoenix Sun Stadium. I mean, there were so many circumstances that made it so inconsistent for this team to really gel on the court. And I just felt like if they would have ran this back another year, you would have had a truer sense of what this team could have been. I felt that it was a little premature. I understand you got a new owner and you want to bring in your guy, and Monty was the holdover, but that's a pretty damn good holdover. A guy that got you to a finals and a best record overall in the NBA, and to let him go like that, I thought it was completely justified. And let me just say this. It just came across my phone that Monty just became the new head coach of the Detroit Pistons. So I'm glad he landed on his feet in that respect. And I know, Mike, you'll have your feelings about him in Detroit, but it still doesn't take away the bitter taste that it left in my mouth for the Phoenix Suns. And I just got to be honest. I don't really give a damn what the Phoenix Suns do anytime soon, because once you mess with one of my guys, I really don't have anything else to want to say about you.
Yeah, no, and I think there was a tremendous amount of surprise when it went down. And the thing that strikes me is, you can't put down roots if you're an NBA head coach. You just can't. The Steve Kerrs and the Greg Popoviches and the Eric Spoelstras of the world are few and far between. I mean, you look at Mike Budenholzer. Mike Budenholzer, we talk about what Monty Williams did here. You talk about, well, he took him all the way to the NBA Finals. The guy that beat him in the finals was fired before he was, And
Nick Nurse fired from the Raptors.
Nick Nurse, I mean, Doc, the next head coach of the Phoenix Suns, Doc was blown out in Philly. It's just, man, the life of an NBA head coach. I guess you go into it with your eyes wide open, but it's still, when it happens, it's not. Because like I said, if you go back and look at things, I 100% agree with you how this went down. And you looked, and they said, when you made the trade for Kevin Durant, like you have to make that trade. I understand that. Like he's a top 10 all-time NBA player. But you cleaned out that bench and what made this team successful during that run. You look at what those guys talk about, the series against the Bucks, the guys that were going to understand their role and do the dirty work and get those minutes that you needed to get. And they never fixed that. They never fixed that. And, the chemistry, whatever else you want to call it, the fact that Monty loses his job and James Jones is still employed, and again, you don't like to see people lose their jobs ever, but, it's just the nature of the business. And I don't know. It's just, it's pretty, I don't even know what to say about it. You kind of put it into words, but it's rough business, that's for sure.
It's rough business, but I'm just glad he got another opportunity, quickly. And, now I become a real Detroit Pistons fan because
there we go. I was waiting for Sean. I was waiting for Sean to cue up the Detroit basketball call.
You know that is banned from that is banned from our show, and you know that.
And it sucks for Phoenix and it sucks for the Suns. Monty Williams agrees to the point that B-Train just made. 6-year, $78.5 million contract to coach the Detroit Pistons. So good for him. You talk about landing. I was going to say landing on your feet. Talk about landing in a pile of money. Good for Monty Williams, and good for my Detroit Pistons. I'm happy about that. I'm very happy about that.
I'm happy for you, Mike. I'm happy for you, brother.
The last thing that we missed since the last time we did our podcast, the NBA draft lottery. And how did we know?
Spurs.
How did we know that you look at teams that go back over time? And I want to be really, really clear. I am not it's not a conspiracy theory, whatever you want to call it. But the Spurs got really lucky way back a generation ago. Phoenix Suns fans know all about that. Having David Robinson on the roster, who for some way, shape, or form had an injury the year Tim Duncan was coming out. And then you had those years of the Duncan Robinson years. Greg Popovich still at the helm, and now he gets a chance to coach another one. And I'm going to butcher the dude's last name, from France, Victor Wembanyama, I think it is. 7'5", can put it on. Yeah, can put it on the floor. Can go. I mean, look, good for him. Good for him going to the Spurs. They'll forget about Duncan and Robinson before too long with this guy.
Mike, I don't think you can ever forget about a Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan is a generational type player, and what he did for that team, 5 championships. I think for Greg Popovich, a guy that has been wallowing in mediocrity for the last couple of years, this is something that could really rejuvenate him. Some of his personal battles, losing his wife a few years ago, not really having a lot to work with as far as a roster, but they didn't want to let go of an icon out there in San Antonio. And now you get this gift that falls in your lap yet again. I look at it and I say, this is the second chance for Greg Popovich. And I think he's just brilliant enough of a basketball mind that he will know exactly how to get the max out of him. And you will see the San Antonio Spurs back on top in the very near future.
Grose, you started to go down. You started to go down the right road there, because there's a handful of franchises in a few different sports that I don't ever want to hear foul play from their fan base, and that's San Antonio, right? Because of this situation, the Green Bay Packers, who, if you're 30 some odd years old, you don't ever know anything outside of Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. Even the Colts, right? Your Colts B-Train, who went from Peyton Manning to Andrew Luck. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to hear foul play from any of you. You got locations like here in Phoenix where you pray and you live your entire life without having a transcendent player come through one of your favorite teams, and you got these markets who went from one to the next to the next. The hell with you. That's if I'm being honest. If I'm being honest, the hell with you.
Breaking news. To hell with you.
It is what it is.
First. That's good. That's well put. All right, so we got a lot to keep on. The nice thing is, even if we take a little bit of a break between now and our next podcast, the NBA Finals will still be going on because they start on June 1st, and I think if a Game 7 is played, I think it's right around the 4th of July. So we'll have plenty of time to talk NBA, keep an eye on things, and break down the hiring of Doc Rivers when that news comes down as well. All right, we'll step aside here. On the other side, the sports that keep on giving, it's the NFL. That's coming up next on Train and Gross.
Train and Gross.
Welcome back in Train and Gross. Don't forget, give us a follow on Twitter at Train and Gross. And I was thinking during the break, I should have mentioned this. You talk about sports franchise or sports cities and how they're perceived or whatever the case may be. How about Miami this year, where you've got the number 8 seed Miami Heat and the number 8 seed Florida Panthers both playing for their sports respective championships? Talk about a city of underdogs, I guess, this year.
I mean, you can look at states, Mike. Florida has been the hot spot the last couple of years. You look at Tampa Bay and what they were able to do for a couple of years there when the Bucks won and the Lightning won. And the Rays, I think one year they went to the World Series and lost as well. So, Florida's been hot in recent history, and they just continue their winning ways down there in Florida. And, good for them.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, NFL news, and like we said, it's a sport that keeps on giving. It's a year-round thing with them, but locally here, the way the release of DeAndre Hopkins came down was a surprise. But the fact that DeAndre Hopkins won't be part of the Arizona Cardinals in 2023, not so much of a surprise. And, I look at this and a couple things come to mind. Number one, this is part of the, you talk about rebuilding processes. This is part of the undoing of the Steve Keim regime, where the reason DeAndre Hopkins wasn't traded this offseason wasn't because DeAndre Hopkins, well, maybe it was a little bit because he was old. Maybe it's a little bit because he doesn't like to practice. Maybe it's a little bit because of, some of the games he's missed. He made too much money. And, the Cardinals said, hey, look, we respect your wishes. Go out and make the deal and bring it back to us, and we will honor it. DeAndre Hopkins could not get himself a trade. So I was of the opinion you wait and you get into training camp and you hope that, that sounds bad to say it that way, but, injuries happen, right? And maybe somebody gets desperate enough and they make a trade with you. If that happens during training camp, then that's how you move DeAndre Hopkins. Releasing him in May, all you get is salary cap relief. But that might have been enough right now because DeAndre Hopkins, it just felt like he didn't want any part of what was going on here. He had gotten to the point where he wasn't even saying good things about Kyler Murray anymore just so he could get out. Whether or not he felt it or not, he was just blasting his way out as only DeAndre Hopkins can go. And now the question is, where does D-Hop land? That's question one. And number two, what's he going to make? Because he was supposed to make north of $15 million this year for the Cardinals. I don't see a scenario in which he makes that this year anyplace. He might get an incentive-laden deal with a contender, a Bills, a Chiefs. And I want to go on record here, B-Train, before I get your thoughts on this. The one place that DeAndre Hopkins will not fit, and I'm going to say this right now, he will not fit with Dan Campbell and the Detroit Lions. Detroit Lions need a premier wide receiver, but can you imagine DeAndre Hopkins picking the days he practices or doesn't practice with Dan Campbell? Can you imagine? Yeah, I got soft tissue damage going on. I'm gonna be taking a couple days off, Coach, but I'll be ready to go on Sunday. We all watched what do you call it on the what's that show called on HBO?
Hard Knocks.
Hard Knocks. We saw how they run training camp in Detroit. DeAndre Hopkins would not fit in Detroit. So we'll scratch that right now.
Mike, there are a lot of different teams that are in need of a veteran pass catcher, And DeAndre Hopkins makes a lot of sense for a lot of different teams. When you start looking at the salary that he was going to account for, he just was too much against the cap. And a guy that's on the other side of 30 that hasn't necessarily been available all the time for the Cardinals, it just didn't make a lot of sense that he was going to get top-notch value for his services. And, Mike, this goes to the Cardinals as a whole as well. A lot of veterans don't want to be part of rebuilds. Veterans understand how hard it is to win in this league. They understand how few opportunities you truly get at winning and being part of a good team. And I think he and Budda Baker have kind of looked around the lay of the land and saw that there was not a lot of hope in 2023 as far as the Arizona Cardinals concerned. And they won out. And I know this is about DeAndre Hopkins. Budda Baker is still a member of the roster, a member of the Arizona Cardinals. I don't know how long that remains, but you look at veterans, and this is kind of become that team again where you don't necessarily want to come if you're a veteran and you're looking for one more opportunity to get a bite of the apple. That is the Vince Lombardi, and they're about 2 or 3 years away, Mike. And it's really that simple. Yeah. You can't put it any other way. They've dismantled, as you said, the whole Steve Keim regime other than Kyler Murray. And he's kind of the lone man standing, and he and Budda Baker. And I think a lot of players on the outside looking in are kind of looking at Budda Baker and looking at DeAndre Hopkins, and there's a little bit of sympathy there because they understand that when you're in a bad situation, all you want is out, and you're trying everything you can to get yourself out. But until the team that owns your rights ultimately wants to do something, you're kind of stuck. And I think for DeAndre, they finally said, hey, we can't make this work. You can't stay. You're going to have to go. We wish you the best. I think they ended it as amicably as they could without it getting into a war of words in the media. Yes. So I think they did the right thing that way, both sides. But any veteran that has played any amount of time in the NFL or really any major sport, you see the writing on the wall. When you look around and you see lots of young guys on the roster, guys that you're unfamiliar with and guys that you hadn't played with and looking really, really young, you start to look at it and say, is this the type of team that I really want to waste my prime years with? I feel like I can still be that guy, but what kind of guy am I going to be with a team that's not really ready to win?
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point, B-Train. And you know, you look at this, the DeAndre Hopkins era, if you will. I mean, you know, the funny thing is he will be forever known, no matter what happens from this point forward, in one of the most iconic plays, individual plays in Arizona Cardinals history. That touchdown catch against the Bills, unfortunately in an empty stadium. But, you know, he'll also be known for missing a playoff game due to injury. He'll also be known for that suspension. He said, hey, when the time is right, I'll let you know what really happened. I guess the time hasn't been right yet, so we'll just have to assume he was suspended for whatever reason. You know, and you know, the other thing too is when you write the book on DeAndre Hopkins, I don't know what, you know, the teams he's been on, right? You know, the Texans had a little bit of success when he was there, but, you know, didn't translate into postseason success for him individually or for the Texans when he was there. And now, you know, his tenure with the Cardinals, they qualified for the playoffs in 2021. He didn't play in that game. So it's interesting to see what the history will show when they tell the DeAndre Hopkins. Sean's favorite line is, you know, when you try to tell the story of an era. So when you try to tell the story of the era, like a great individual talent, I mean, there's no question about that. But what is it translated into? And if you're the Bills or if you're the Chiefs, those are the two odds-on favorite. Is that how do I put this? They both have a lot of salary cap work to do if they're going to get DeAndre Hopkins onto their roster. Both of those two are two of the three teams at the bottom with the least amount of cap space available right now. Kansas City apparently has less than $1 million available under the cap. Buffalo about $1.5 million. So they're going to have to make some work, and they're going to have to and we know what making work means in the salary cap era, taking money away from other players in order to get DeAndre Hopkins, right? So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Mike, I look at this and whoever and wherever he goes, he is going to make them a much better team. But I look at him and unfortunately, you almost have to look at him and kind of mirror his career like Chris Paul. Great regular season players, did a lot to elevate their teams. They were really good at times, but then once it came to the playoffs, it came to January, just like when it came to May for Chris Paul, they turn into pumpkins. They're not available. They can't go out there and play, and it's just unfortunate and it's frustrating because you know the type of talent. You've seen the talent all regular season, and then once you get to where it really matters most, where your legacy is really built, you're not actually available to go out there and help your team. And that just leads to a lot of frustration and a lot of unrealized potential. I think that's something that a phrase you could really stick next to DeAndre Hopkins is just time with the Houston Texans, and now it's time with the Arizona Cardinals, unrealized potential. And Mike, one more thing before we get out of here. We also got to look at the all-time fleecing of a trade for DeAndre Hopkins to bring him here. When you think of what the Houston Texans gave or got in order to give up DeAndre Hopkins, you got a damaged, David Johnson and a ham sandwich basically for DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, Steve Keim, if he's never known for anything else, he'll be known for fleecing the Houston Texans in that situation to get one DeAndre Hopkins here in Arizona.
No doubt about that. And sometimes I feel like I'm unfair when I talk about Steve Keim, but that will absolutely go down as one of the all-time greatest heists in NFL history. I just looked it up while you were talking, though. DeAndre Hopkins has played in 6 postseason games in his career. He's got 1 touchdown catch.
Wow.
And, again, it's not fair to compare players because, you look at different eras, different teams, different systems, different all together. But, we were so blessed to be able to play with and us to watch a guy that wore number 11 here who was so great in the regular season and somehow managed to turn it up a notch or 2 or 10 in the postseason. Like I could sit here and watch highlights of Larry Fitzgerald against the Green Bay Packers all day long, every day, what he did in the postseason. So it's just, when you look at all-time greats, you got to look at the whole body of work. And again, it's an 11 men on the field at the same time. So I don't want to be unfair, but it's part of the story. It's part of the story when you talk about DeAndre Hopkins.
Absolutely, Mike. And I'll do you one better. Like the fact that he wore 10, Larry wore number 11. They both had dreads. And you look at, you don't even have to go with the Green Bay games. Just look at 2008 against the Philadelphia Eagles and the Pittsburgh Steelers, the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl. That tells you all you need to know about Larry Fitzgerald and where he looms in the annals of Arizona sports legends.
No, it's absolutely remarkable. They talk about it like, Larry Fitzgerald, he had a Hall of Fame career just in his playoff games. Like throw out the 200 and some odd regular season games that he played, throw out I don't even remember now the numbers, they're off the charts. But you look at what that man did, and we talk about it, and Sean hit the nail on the head, talk about other cities and other franchises. He did that with this franchise. He played in about the same number of postseason games. I think he played in 3 more postseason games than DeAndre Hopkins did. Fitz had 10 touchdown catches in the postseason. Fitz went almost 1,000 yards in postseason games. Again,
crazy.
I want to be fair. Like, I don't want to go too all in on this, but you got to tell the whole. You got to tell the whole story. Tell the whole story.
Absolutely.
Hey, the other thing too that I'm struck by, B-Train, here it is sitting on May 31st as we record this. We're 100 days away from the start of the NFL regular season. It's remarkable. It seems like just recently we were breaking down the Super Bowl and And now, like I said, we're 100 days away. Off season moves quickly as we look ahead. So we'll spend a lot of time in the coming weeks talking about that, I'm sure. But 100 days till the NFL season gets underway.
Can't wait.
All right, I love it. College football, less than that. And we'll see by the time we do our next podcast who's in what conference, since it's going to change on a day-to-day basis. Real quickly before we wrap this up, I saw something, and I didn't even tell you guys I was going to do this, but I saw something. It's remarkable, the Deion Sanders effect at the University of Colorado. You probably saw, like everybody else did, and I don't even know if we talked about this on a previous podcast. It was snowing the day they played their spring game, and they sold out that stadium. Like, they didn't sell that stadium out during the regular season. I forget how long it's been since they sold out the spring game. And now that the schedules are set, literally they're fighting over Colorado games. Colorado's not going to be very good next year. Colorado will win 3 or 4 games next year. Prime will be on TV. Good, like Fox picked up the first. I think it was Fox picked up the first 2 games. They play TCU and Nebraska back to back to kick off the season. That's part of the reason why he's only going to win 3 or 4 games. But national TV wants every bit of what Deion Sanders is doing at the University of Colorado.
Mike, if you're a high school senior that's looking for a big time program to attend, you have to look at Colorado like you look at Alabama, like you look at Georgia, like you look at some of these SEC schools, because now the notoriety is so great. You can, and with the NIL and everything else that goes along with it, Mike, you have the same opportunity at Colorado that you would anywhere else of one being seen and having your games being televised nationally, so mom and dad and wherever city that you're from can watch you play. It's the same thing that you've seen with the SEC and the Big 12 for years and years and years. And it's one man having that much of an effect on an entire sport. It's amazing to see what Deion has been able to do in such a short period of time, going all the way back to his days at Jackson State, and to elevate that HBCU to what it is now. And then now in really basically 4 months, take the University of Colorado from also ran a one-win team to now one of the hottest tickets that there is in college football. You just tip your hat to Deion. He's cooking up something big, and we're just witnessing the very beginning of it. And I'm excited to see where he takes college football, because he's going to be every bit the major player that a Nick Saban or a Kirby Smart or any of these other big-time coaches are in college football right now.
Yeah, while you were talking, I brought up the schedule. They play on Fox, on ESPN. That's their first 3 games. And I'm looking at the schedule. I don't see a Pac-12 network game for the first at least 5 or 6 weeks.
Wow.
They're not gonna bury him there. The flip side is, by the time he gets here to Tempe in the early October, he could be 0-5 because did the non-conference schedule. Then he goes at Oregon and home against USC to start out the Pac-12 season. So ASU could get a winless CU Buffs team in early October when they meet at Sun Devil Stadium. All right, we'll step aside here. Come back, more of Training Grose on the other side. Welcome back. You know what that music means. It's time for me to hand things off to Sean Crespin for the break.
That's right. I'm going to give you guys some statements from around the world of sports. You tell me if you're pumping the brakes on it or if you're rolling with that particular statement. So we will start in the National Football League. I got a couple of them here in the NFL, so we'll stick here for a moment. This is something we've seen in the college game now since 2018. We're now going to be given a 1-year shot in the NFL as well. Teams now have the option to fair catch a kickoff and automatically have the ball be placed at the 25-yard line on kickoffs. Andy Reid, Travis Kelce, amongst others, have really voiced their opinion of further devaluing special teams. So pump the brakes or not, removing yet even more of the kicking game is a slippery slope that just doesn't feel right now in the NFL. B-Train?
Oh, I'm not pumping the brakes. It does not feel right. I think about some of my best friends who made their careers on special teams. You're really devaluing special teams as a whole. And if you're not going to have these plays that are going to greatly affect games, then it's not going to matter who you roll out there. If you just fair catch every single time, then you can put starters out there and they'll just jog down there and basically have a warm-up before the series starts. So you're eliminating actual roster spots for special teams players, where in years past you had to devote at least 3 to 5 spots just for special teamers. You're not going to need that now. And I think the NFL is trying to get to where you're having those extra spots, one for quarterback, emergency quarterback, and you're having more players ready and available to go in case some of your starters get injured.
Grose?
Yeah, I completely agree. And look, this is what happens when you let lawyers make football decisions. That's really what it is.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna play the player safety card on this one. Look, it's changing the game, and I get where people are upset about it, and but it's what it is. You lose enough lawsuits, it's going to force change. And player safety, you can say all you want about it, but that's what we're looking at right now. And I wish I could look at this and say, that's it. This is a one-off decision. There's more to come, I think. I really do.
Yeah, and it is unfortunate. I mean, there's a lot of guys. The one that jumps out to me right away is Terrell Davis, TD. He was on his way off the Broncos roster until he made a couple of plays in special teams, and that was how he fought his way onto the roster. And then next thing you know, we got to have a magical 3-4 year run at the detriment of my Raiders and all. But game respect game. He was sensational. We may not have even had his career without special teams. So devaluing it the way Andy Reid was talking, Travis Kelce, and so forth, I completely agree. There were a lot of rules in place, collectively bargained and such, for Thursday night football. That is changing this year. Thursday night football now has the ability to have a flexed schedule later in the season, and teams can now play more than one Thursday night game in a year. Pump the brakes or not, and I'm stalling because his internet's back now. I think B-Train's back with us. Pump the brakes or not, Thursday night flex schedule, B-Train, is a terrible idea in the NFL.
It is a terrible idea. And look, I understand. And, Mike, it's funny that you were just talking about player safety and losing lawsuits. Well, this is them showing they don't give a damn about player safety, because now you can flex teams into playing 3 days earlier than they're expected to play. And don't tell me about player safety when you're going to actually put these guys at risk. I know you have to give them a little bit of upfront notice, and I think it's like 3 or 4 weeks notice before they actually play the game. But give me a break. To think that you can play games earlier than what they're scheduled to be played, and that you're really concerned about the player's safety, give me a break.
I like what Al Michaels said, and hopefully we can all be at the point where we're Al Michaels. You can say whatever's on your mind and don't worry about anybody coming back at you. But he said, I'm just hoping that they scheduled games that are good enough that we won't have to flex. But I'm with you, B-Train. You can't talk about player safety on the one hand and then do something like this on the other hand. I mean, you talked about that. You shared with us what it's like as a player to get ready for one Thursday night game in a year. And you knew where it was. You circled it on the calendar. You knew when it was coming. And, I don't know I haven't read all the rules around it, like how much is the advance notice do they have to give, but it doesn't matter. It's tough, and player safety is a convenient excuse when they want it to be. The other thing too is, like, you keep doing this. Like, don't forget, we've got a Black Friday game this year, right? You got your first ever Black Friday game. Like, they are looking for ways to increase the TV money year after year after year, and at some point something's going to give. It just has to. You can't keep it up.
Staying in the National Football League, Brock Purdy. I don't know if you guys saw this local kid. I think Grose, I know you're rooting for the kid. And, I think we all were kind of the way the year played out last year. But injury in the playoffs with the elbow. However, he's throwing already, and believe it or not, could be ready for week 1, as amazing as that sounds. But pump the brakes or not, regardless of Brock's availability, the 49ers owe it to themselves to see Trey Lance get a few more starts. Pump the brakes or not.
Pump the brakes. You saw what Brock Purdy was to this team. You saw how galvanizing he was and how the fan base responded to Brock Purdy. You even told us, Sean, some of the things that they were chanting while you were at a game out there in Santa Clara. So they have totally bought into Brock Purdy, and I don't think there's any way you can go back to Trey Lance now. You feel bad for the young man. It was a tough break, literally, with the ankle injury, but to see this young man go out and perform the way that he did and to galvanize this team, and had he not gotten injured in that NFC Championship game, the Eagles probably still would have won, but it would have looked a little bit different than what it did. I just feel like they found their quarterback, and they cannot wait until they get him back under center to start the season.
Grose?
100%. If you are the 49ers, if you're Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, you built this roster to win now. And, it's the NFL, and it doesn't, you don't get a lot of chances at it. So if it's Brock Purdy, so be it. If it's Trey Lance, so be it. If it's Sam Darnold, so be it. Whoever gives them the best chance to win is who's going to be starting quarterback. And if that means you got to move on from Trey, look, if they're going to win games and they have to, swallow their pride and move on from Trey Lance, I think they'll happily do it. And I bring up the Sam Darnold part because they were talking about, and I know it's a mini camp and OTA, whatever, but they're saying, well, looking at Sam Darnold versus Trey Lance in the absence of Brock Purdy right now, that's what brought that question up. So I think it's up to Trey Lance to make it to the point where they can't not have him on the roster. I mean, you've been in the league long enough, so the only one they owe it to is the fans. Try to win some games, man.
I agree with that. I think there's something to be said about trying to showcase him as much as you can in the preseason. Because if you're going to try to move him, what have you seen? If you're a team that's even remotely interested, what have you seen? You didn't even see him play in the college game much. You know what I mean? So what is his value at this point? And considering what you gave up, that's a lot to swallow if you're San Francisco. I think you got to find a way to get him on the field, whether it's preseason or what. Just to try to showcase that this kid belongs to the National Football League. We haven't seen it yet. We flat out haven't seen it. In the NBA, real quick, for the first time in his career, LeBron said he will contemplate retirement this offseason. He also goes through maybe the biggest surgery of his career, rehab, all that kind of thing. Pump the brakes or not, you're buying it that LeBron could call it quits sometime this offseason.
Pump the brakes. There's no way in hell he's calling it a career when he still has the opportunity to play with his son, which he has said all along that's what he wants to do. Well, actually 2 years out, because his son has to go to Southern Cal
play at USC,
USC, and then the year after that, he can get that done. So LeBron is going to have to play 2 more years in order to realize that dream. I don't see any reason to doubt that he can play 2 more years at a high level. From what we saw this past season, he wasn't the issue with the Los Angeles Lakers. It was his cohort, Anthony Davis, and the rest of those other guys that didn't show up when the playoffs came around. And look, the Denver Nuggets made everybody look bad, but LeBron James was not one of those guys. He performed, he did what he was supposed to do, and until he decides he doesn't want to play, I think the Lakers would be very lucky to still have LeBron James on their roster.
Grose?
Totally agree with B-Train on this one as well. I think that comment that you heard from LeBron was in the frustration of being eliminated. They lost a tight game in that deciding game to the Nuggets.
Swept, by the way, swept.
Yeah, thank you. I think it was a 2-point game, though, that they lost the game 4. And look, that was frustration bubbling up, but the desire to play with his son is real. And probably frustration with some of his teammates on that Lakers team. but he'll be there. He'll be back. And as B-Train said, whether or not it's in Los Angeles, that 2 years from now, he'll play with his son as well, because he strikes me as the kind of guy, once he puts his mind to something, he's going to get it done. So we have not seen the last of LeBron James in the NBA.
All right, so this last one, usually I do a little pop culture, but I need your guys' advice, and I need you to tell me whether or not I have a legitimate gripe to be upset here. So I went and got the haircut today, right? A little high and tight, get it right before I go out of town this weekend. I go to get a haircut. Now, usually I schedule an appointment ahead of time, but this was a decision I made this afternoon, like, hey, I need to swing through and get my haircut, right? So I checked in online. There was a 0-minute wait. So I don't even bother to check in online. I drive to the haircut place, right? I pull up. I'm walking to the door. Another gentleman is walking to the door at the same time, all right? Now, I fancy myself as a guy with some respect. I open the door. I hold it for the gentleman. He walks in front of me, okay? This man walks to the counter. Also having not checked in, he takes the next appointment, and I have to wait 10 minutes. I could have very easily opened the door, walked my ass in front of him, not held the door for him like a gentleman, and then I would have been first. Pump the brakes or not, I got a legitimate gripe here, having sat my ass there for 10 minutes waiting for this man after holding the door for him. I had a busy day, you guys know that. I got a legitimate gripe, pump the brakes or not?
Pump the brakes.
How you figure? This man should have been nice enough to say, you know what, this gentleman was here before me. Let him have this appointment. Instead, he made me wait 10 minutes.
Okay, that was a little bit of punk ass move. But come on, we're talking about 10 minutes. We're not talking about an hour. If you would have said an hour and a half, you would have had a much better argument. But 10 minutes?
Fair.
Come on, man.
Fair. Gross.
Sean, you and I used to do movie reviews when we did the radio show together.
Yeah.
Did you ever see the movie with Michael Douglas, Falling Down?
No.
All right, look it up. There's a movie Michael Douglas is in where he's just having a bad day, and one thing after another.
Oh yes, I know. Yes, I do. I know. I do know that movie. Yeah, the scene of him in the fast food restaurant's amazing. But anyway,
yeah,
where are you going?
I thought the way you were setting this up, I thought you were going to go Michael Douglas on this. Like, your voice was getting loud. You were yelling. I could see the vein in your forehead start pumping.
Right.
Like I was worried. But dude, it was 10 minutes. I know what you did. You sat in the chair and you played on your phone for 10 minutes. You didn't even know.
I did. While the lady wrapped up the person she was with, and then she got to me. But he didn't know it was going to be 10 minutes. For all he knew, it could have been an hour.
Listen to you, Michael Douglas. You're falling down.
I just think, listen, I held the door for him. The least he could have done is be like, you know what, this gentleman was here before me. Like when you're standing somewhere and somebody, say you're like at the deli or something, if somebody comes up and goes, who's next? And people are usually nice enough to go, oh, he was here before me. You know what I mean? That I was just expecting that kind of common courtesy. Didn't get it. I'm a little upset by that. I think I have a little bit of a gripe here.
Next time, just check in.
I know. 9 times out of 10 I do. I just didn't today. Anyway. It's time for how we end every show. We go with the lighthearted mood. B-Train puts on the specs, breaks out his dad joke of the week, delivers it for us as we get out of here. There is a grading system to this. If you've listened to the show, you know that no matter what, we're going to get one of these. If it's a quality dad joke, you're going to hear the laughter. All right. If it's above and beyond, you get the standing ovation. Grose calls it the clap. All right. And there's always that opportunity. It just doesn't land. I mean, dad jokes can be a fine line sometimes, and you get one of these. So B-Train, lay it on us, my friend.
All right, here we go. What does an angry pepper do?
What does an angry pepper do?
It gets jalapeno face.
Okay. At first, it took me a moment. That's pretty good, actually. Gross.
Clap, clap, clap. I like it. Jalapeno face.
Mm-hmm. I was about to get a up in that face of the guy I held the door for.
Let it go. Hey, real quickly, I'll leave you guys with this as we wrap it up. We should have done this off the breaks. Al Pacino's 83 years of age.
Oh, my God, I know.
Oh. He ain't Robert De Niro, man. The old guys are getting it done.
She's 29.
His girlfriend's 29 and she's expecting. Come on, man. Seriously?
Hey, Hey, he and Robert De Niro, you know, they're both like, hey, we still got it, baby.
Yeah, I'm not mad at the man. Are you, Gross? Listen, if you're in the 80s and somehow end up being a single man and there's 29, I mean, that's not terrible, right? It's not. There's worse things an 80-some-odd-year-old man could have in his life than that, if we're being real.
No, I'm just saying, man, when you're 80, you're 83, do you really want to be dealing with all of that?
You think he's dealing with he's dealing with one thing.
Hey, usually when you're talking about 83-year-old men, we're talking about powdered milk.
83. All right, we'll leave it at that. Thanks for hanging out with us. Episode 102 of Training Gross. We'll see you next time.
We'll holla.